Welcome, Comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, the national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. The book club's leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we celebrate our book club's quinceañero. Yes, our book club is 15 years old this year, and it's been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these many years, and we look forward to the next 15. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat. And so tonight, please help us welcome authors María Amparo Escandón and Juliet Menéndez. These interviews will begin shortly. I'm sorry, Menéndez, I apologize, Comadres. Their interviews will begin shortly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can keep your videos on. We suggest you put yourself, we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, but gallery mode works just as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. So first, let's start with our book club's illustrious history of 15 years. Comadre Tess, would you take it away?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Tess Tobin. I'm the submissions coordinator for the book club. Welcome. A little history of the book club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York in Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started our teleconferences in October 2006. We are in our 15th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and the book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website at latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Karen?
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our March 2022 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will begin with our interview of author María Amparo Escandón. María Amparo Escandón is the author of the #1 LA Times bestsellers, Esperanza's Box of Saints and Gonzalez and Daughter Trucking Company. She was named a writer to watch by both Newsweek and the LA Times. María Amparo was born in Mexico City and has lived in LA for nearly 4 decades. Interviewing María Amparo Escandón will be Teresa Lara, board president for Las Comadres para las Americas. Her experience includes civic engagement, brand management, public relations, and communications. She has served as a consultant to businesses and governments around the world. Comadre Teresa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen. So wonderful to be here. I am thrilled and honored to interview a legendary literist, an author, and it's so fitting that it's our quinceañera, and she's Maria's literary madrina. So let's see, I can't see Maria on my screen. We're here to discuss LA weather, and today, ironically, we have weather in LA. If you're not here in California, it's gray, it's gloomy, it's rainy, it's wonderful. And Maria, would you share with us how LA weather came about? What was the inspiration?
Of course, thank you, Teresa. I do want to thank first Maria, Teresa, Karen, Nora. You know, you have an amazing organization, and I commend you for this incredible job that you're doing, just bringing together the Latino community around words. You know, for me, that is incredibly important. And I thank you for inviting me to speak today with you, and I look forward to it. And yeah, let's talk about the weather. It's raining in LA right now. Very weird. Okay. And I happened to be in the freeway this morning for a reason. I try to avoid it when it's raining, but I had to. And oh, it was a madhouse. We don't know how to drive in the rain. You know, I mean, it's a disaster. But so anyway, in answer to your question, Teresa, I was living in New York. I lived there for 4 years between 2014 and 2018. I went there for my husband's work, and we knew it was temporary, but it was a very exciting time for both of us because we had never lived in New York and wanted to live that experience, which is incredible, right? So we went, and along the way, I met a lot of New Yorkers who told me, LA, there's no weather in LA. So I was a little bit shocked because I've always been concerned about the weather, and it's very present in my mind, all the drought and the wildfires and the El Niño, La Niña, La Nada, you know, there's just a lot of weather events, the Santana winds, for God's sake. So I sort of thought, you know, maybe I should debunk this trope. There is weather in LA. And along with that, I wanted to use it as a metaphor for the life of an LA family, an LA Mexican-American family who happens to live in LA. The father, the patriarch, is, you know, his family has been in California since the time when it was still Mexico. The matriarch is a first-generation Mexican Jew who they meet when she comes to LA to do like an exchange student, and they fall in love and they get married, and so they raise their 3 daughters. And I wanted to just sort of tell the story of this family, and a little bit like the trope that there's no weather in LA. There is also some sort of idea out there in the country that people in LA, we all live like celebrities, and that, you know, we walk around in our, you know, Ferraris and with the screenplay, you know, soggy under our armpits, handing out headshots, you know. And, you know, it's a little bit of a cliche that I wanted also to debunk. This is a typical family with a lot of drama. They are really surviving a disastrous year, both as a family and in terms of weather and how the weather affects them personally. And so by doing that, the weather is some sort of metaphor. You know, it's not always 72 and sunny in LA, but it's not always 72 and sunny in any given family, just like anywhere else. And so that was the idea.
Yes. Was that difficult or easy to preserve the wholeness or the wholesomeness of not making it an LA celebrity scene? Was it challenging to appeal, since people think, oh, LA, Hollywood, and to have that celebrity? Or was it like, I'm focused, I'm just going to stay with Alvarado family and their stories?
I just wrote from an honest place. I think that's the best way to put it. it's not about my family. It's not a memoir, but I see myself in a family like that. I am a first generation Mexican American. I was born in Mexico City. I came after college with limited English and no money. And I started an advertising business and have been here and have become a citizen over the years. Lots of paperwork and stuff, but that's another story. So I wanted to remain honest and just write from my point of view of what I know. And I also wanted to picture a kind of Latino that is not always featured in novels. For instance, the matriarch, she's a Mexican Jew. A lot of people have told me since the book came out, and I kind of suspected that was going to happen, was really, are there Jews in Mexico? So yes, there are, and quite a few. And I, in fact, have some Jewish friends who were very kind to read the novel when it was still a manuscript to, help me, with any inconsistencies. And also, my husband is a Mexican Jew. And so it's really close to my heart. And I have, very good resources to be able to write about this family. The other thing is the three daughters, they are all professionals. They have a career, they're working, they're making good money. One is a chef, the other one is an architect, the other one is a social media guru. And they're doing their thing, living in the Latino community, but at the same time, living their own lives and adapting and growing in the city, just like everybody else.
And I love that the bond that the sisters had, that life happens and they stay together. And I just really appreciated you keeping that integrity. Like there wasn't like just scandal or like there was like, I felt like it was my neighbors, who I was reading about. And also like real life events. The story is around the father, Oscar, and without giving too much away in the book, but there's a moment where it's like something's going on with him. And I think that, a lot of us have gone through life where we kind of do a double take on, we catch something strange happening, with our parents, and you want to rationalize, like, is this normal, or am I just so checked out in my career that I don't know what's going on at home with my parents? And then also like his reflection on life, because he was like a brilliant real estate investor who passed up a lot of opportunity. And so here he is in this phase of life where, he's at a crossroad, like, do I pursue my dreams? Or there's a lot going on in that. Were there any other themes, like as you're going through your tours and meeting with folks, that have emerged from the book, that people are that readers are receptive to?
Yes, I mean, readers who have contacted me through social media, they have been very receptive and really liked how unique it is, but at the same time, how typical it is, this family. And I always think that what is personal really is universal. We all have family ties, we all have issues with our family members. We, at a more intense or less or not, but we always, family is a huge thing in our lives, whether we have it, whether we don't, whether it's a good family, a bad family. Over the pandemic, a lot of us came home. A lot of us went back to our roots and our homes, and we had to deal with our family members. And that sort of, and in this novel, oddly enough, they also end up under one roof, which is
During the pandemic, like it's like you knew what was going to happen in the future.
I know, and I read
the
it before,
parallel.
I wrote it before the pandemic, but it just so happened that, but a lot of people really related to that. A lot of people said, yeah, of course, in a moment of crisis, who am I going to turn to? My sister, my mom, my dad, my family. And so this was something that really hit home with a lot of the readers, because they understood what it meant in terms of going through a disastrous year. And every time something happened to one of the family members, the rest would come around and help, and try to help their siblings. And that is what the three sisters do.
Yeah. And art imitates life. So as the book was coming out, it was during the pandemic, and we'll get back to the story. But given that the book came out during the pandemic, I'm sure that of course was unexpected, and so you had to pivot and do a lot of the book tours, over Zoom and so forth. And what were the benefits, though? Were there any benefits or highlights as a result of having to change how to promote and how to engage, with the book, or the book with the readers? Yeah.
It was definitely a learning experience. My two previous books, I went on book tour, very traditional, 21 cities in 25 days, media, whatever. But the social media thing wasn't big yet. And of course, the Zoom and all of that wasn't really a thing back in the day. But now it was a big learning experience for me. And it has, in my view, great things. But it also lacks other things. And the great thing about doing everything virtual is that I have been able to connect with so many people from all over the place. I get invited to book clubs and all over the country. And so it is fantastic, because you don't have to travel, and yet here you are, we're speaking, people are in different cities, and here we all are connecting, which is fabulous. I love that. I think what it lacks is the personal, direct touch. One of my favorite things is to do book readings and signings at bookstores. I love supporting independent Latino bookstores in my area and wherever I go. And one of the things that I love is to be there in person, talk to people, say hello, take a selfie, sign the book, and then they tell me their stories and I tell them mine, and it's just, we connect. And that's not possible, or it wasn't possible. I'm starting to do it now, finally. And I don't know how long it's going to last, because here comes the variant, right? But
yeah.
yeah, but for now, I'm able to do it, and I'm loving it. So if there's a way we can find to be able to do both, and I think it's going to be possible, because we're not gonna say, oh, the pandemic's over, now we're gonna throw Zoom away and we're gonna go back to no. But I think it's gonna be a mix. And I love that. I think if we manage to make it like that, to do a mix and do some virtual events, social media, in-person events, then you have the best of both worlds.
That's a great idea, like a hybrid model, because even if we do in person, there may be folks who still are a little reluctant. So to have like a Zoom at a live event, that requires a lot of coordination. That's a great idea. Yeah. It was LA Weather was chosen by Reese's Book Club. How was that call? Like, how did that come about? And yes, I'll leave it with Oh no.
I am really bad at keeping secrets. And so that was really difficult because I knew, I was told months before, like 3 or 4 months before the book came out, my publisher called me and they told me, you know, your book was selected for as a September pick, but you can't tell anybody. And I'm like, no, please. So it was really hard to keep that secret. I was able to, I mean, I did tell my mom and my sister, but other than that, I couldn't tell anybody, and it was pretty intense. But I couldn't believe it. I almost fell off my seat when they told me, because I never in my wildest dreams imagined that the book would get picked for the book club. Yeah.
And some of the book selections are then made into movies. So just, you know, hoping. I miss the Alvarado sisters and that family. And I thought when it was done, it's like, please let there be a sequel. Will there be a sequel? I want to know what happens. It was, there's so much there. There's such
Yes,
such a good
yes.
family. I mean, I'm sure that that's also top secret as well. To
But
just
there
know
are,
that.
you know, there are some loose ends at the end
Yeah.
that we're not going to reveal because it would be a spoiler, but there are some loose ends on purpose because life is really a continuum. And the book is structured like a calendar. So January to December, every month, every chapter is a month. And when we get to December, not everything gets resolved. So why is that? Because life is a continuum. You know, not everything gets resolved, and you know, come New Year's and everything is resolved, and then we start from scratch. That would be something. So I wanted to be more realistic about that, you know, and leave a little bit of ambiguity and uncertainty, and you know what's going to happen. Now I hope that, you know, someday there will be a TV series where I can do more and more seasons and develop the story further, because just like you, I miss them. I miss that family. You know, when you develop a character, it becomes like part of your family. And I spent such great time writing them and creating their world and just doing, you know, just living LA through them, that now that I'm done and the book is published, I miss them.
Yeah, it had a very Norman Lear tone, you know, where it was like a very simple family with profound characters. And I know that you did a lot of research, because the actual weather that you mentioned in each chapter was the weather on that particular day. And I just thought, is it the chicken before the egg? Did she write the story according to the weather that day, or she, like, it's like a calculus formula. I mean, it was brilliant. This masterpiece that you put together.
I did research the weather. I Googled, you know, I went to the National Oceanic, to see if that particular day, what was the weather like? Was there a full moon? Was there, had it rained? Was there a Santana wind? Was there a drought, or maybe, and all of it is real, except for one day that I really needed it to rain, and it didn't rain that day. And I said, you know what, I'm just gonna make it up. It's fiction.
Yeah.
And so I did, but that's the only one weather entry that is not true. I still haven't gotten a weatherman come to me and say, hey, that didn't happen.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
So in wrapping up, as our last question, and we have a lot of us writers, aspiring writers, which I know you have a thing about, you know, what is your writing ritual? Like, what is it like when you wake up in the morning, or are you an evening writer, or do you have a certain system or ritual?
Yeah. I don't have a particular method, but I do have two different areas where I work. I have my right brain table or desk, a little desk that I have downstairs. And that little desk is my right brain desk where I pay my bills and I email people and, I do all the, the work end of it. And then I have this desk where I'm sitting right now, which is in the guest bedroom. And this is where I do my left brain stuff. And this is where I write. But I don't really have a schedule or a time limit that I need or come out with 10 pages, nothing like that. I just go about my life. I run errands, I go to the supermarket, I drive, I, do whatever I need to do. And I'm always thinking about my characters, my plot, what's gonna happen. If I have a minute, I'll jot it down in my phone. I have my little ideas that I jot down. And for me, that is writing. Then when I sit at the computer, that's typing. That's downloading, everything I've been thinking about. I just download it and put it into words and tell the story. But even if I sit only for 2 hours a day at the computer, I already work like 8 hours just thinking all the time about my characters. And that has really helped me to understand writer's block as a tool rather than an obstacle. So whenever I can, I tell my colleagues and aspiring writers, embrace writer's block, because it means that your brain is telling you, you're not ready. Hold off. Don't sit down and write. You're going to be frustrated because you're not ready. Go about your life. Go out there, eavesdrop on people's conversations at the restaurant, at the supermarket, wherever you are, at work. Just live your life and think about your characters. Think about your plot. Create their world. And then when you finally think you're ready, you can sit down and write, and then it will flow. And that is sort of a method that has proven good for me.
Do you download in English or Spanish or both?
First English and then Spanish. I do my own translations, but I first write it in English because I started to develop that practice because I wanted to learn more English. And it has been really a language education. Writing novels not in your native language is very hard, but at the same time, I have improved my vocabulary very much. And from the first novel, that was super difficult to write. Now this one is also super difficult, but at least I have more words that I can use that I've learned. So it's a great exercise. And then the translation to Spanish is easy because I already solved everything. I just need to use my own native language to put it into words.
Right. And I read that you had said English is the language of the mind, Spanish is the language of the heart. And,
yes.
it kind of taps in with both.
That's what I taught my kids because I wanted them to be bilingual. And so I wanted them to speak Spanish at home with us and their grandparents, but I wanted them to speak in English at school or at work or out in the street with their friends, So I always said, that Spanish is the language of the heart and English is the language of the mind. So they would be able to differentiate. Oh, okay.
Yes. Well, Maria, thank you so much. I hope that that we get to meet you in person soon. We're in LA, so perhaps we'll meet you at the next Comadrazo when we start to meet in person.
I would love that. If you let me know when it's gonna be, I would love to be there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating and for being here. And I think we may have Q&A at the end. I'm not sure, but for now we'll move on to Karen, who will introduce the next author, and that's it. Thank you, Maria, and
Thank
you
you.
can
Thank
always
you very
count on
much.
Las Comadres.
Yes.
So always, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Juliet Menéndez is a Guatemalan American author and illustrator living between Guatemala City, Paris, and New York. While working as a bilingual teacher in New York City's public schools, Juliet noted the need for more books that depicted children like the ones in her classroom. So she studied design and illustration in Paris. Latinitas is her first children's book. Interviewing Juliet Menéndez is Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas, a networking and support organization she launched 21 years ago, serving over 10,000 plus Latina women in more than 65 cities and 28 states, including Puerto Rico. Nora is also on the board of trustees for the Austin Community College and has been recognized for her work by several organizations, including AARP and the Girl Scouts of Central Texas. Comadre Nora, take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all of you for being here today. What an enjoyable interview, Teresa. Absolutely wonderful. And María Amparo, what a pleasure to get to meet you. And now it truly is my honor to talk with Juliet Menéndez, whose editor, or not her editor, her agent is the same agent as Las Comadres book when we published our first book, the Count on Me book. So we have a special connection to Juliet. And so, Juliet, you're currently living in Guatemala City, not in Paris and not in New York. So why are you in Guatemala City?
That's a great question. So I always kind of had family that was between different places. My mother is from the US, my father is from Guatemala, and my mother had also traveled a lot. She was definitely like a free spirit in the 60s. And so she had a lot of connections around the world, and she always really inspired that in us. And so my sisters lived in different places. There was a time when my family was on different continents, all of us. So that was always something that was part of my family. But my mother and father actually both live here in Guatemala, and during the pandemic especially, I really haven't left. I've really just been here with them.
Okay, great. Well, you know, that kind of frames the question for me about, were you looking for yourself when you wrote this book, when you put this together? In addition to, well, tell us how it came together for you. How did you create the stories?
Well, what I tend to talk about is actually how it happened from being a teacher, but that's a really great question, and I will get to it too, because I think there's definitely part of that in it. But yeah, this book, actually, the idea started back in 2014, which I can't believe it's been so long. But then again, I didn't even know I was going to be a writer back then. So I guess a lot of things have happened in that time. Yeah, and it started while I was working as an art teacher in Upper Manhattan. I was working with students that had families that came from the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Mexico mainly. And when I would walk through the halls of the schools, I would see posters on the walls of people like Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and Dali. And I thought to myself, what if some fresh new faces were up on these walls that looked more like my students? And that really set me off in this investigation of Latinx history. And originally the idea was to include both men and women. But as I was reading all of these stories, and I was finding really interesting stories, but I kept noticing that again and again, women were in the margins or in the footnotes and just not being presented as the central figures that really shaped our history. They weren't just there to observe it. And so if there was anything that was going to bring out the feminist in me, it was that. And I decided to dedicate my research to Latina women. However, my background, as you mentioned in your wonderful little introduction, was in design and also teaching. And I really wasn't sure if I was the one who should make this into a book. Or write it. And it was Adriana Dominguez who came across my work and started talking with me and just said, you know what, from everything you're telling me, I think you could write this book. Why don't you try it? And we'll see how it goes from there. And really just having someone have that confidence and just talking with me through the process, it made a huge difference. So that's how it became a book. But to answer your question about whether there was a part of me looking for myself in this book, I hadn't thought about it that way exactly, but I think that there is certainly a huge part of me that's always trying to understand my identity. I definitely grew up with both cultures. As Maria was saying before, how she taught her children to always be bilingual. My parents were like that too. From the time that I was little, I always was speaking both languages, and both cultures were very much celebrated in my household. So I think that it's something that was with me, but I always felt like there was, I think in the US especially, there's this, you know, I didn't learn about Latin American history in my school growing up. I was definitely kind of on the outside of a lot of things, even with the Latinos, because I had this background where I did speak English. And, you know, I think that it was always kind of like, I'm not really one or the other, and I'm also both. And I think a lot of people experience that. So I think that there was a little bit of a disconnect with my Latina side throughout my education, which was mainly in the US. I did my high school and college in the US. And so I think that I really did want to reconnect, and coming back to Guatemala, and it gave me a special love for this project that I think I wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's a really good question. I will think about that more on my own
Well,
as
actually, that's why Las Comadres was born, because we were looking for each other. And so it you know, this whole idea fit to me with where we've been, and kind of, again, looking for each other and trying to build that connection. So do think about it a little bit more. I'd love to know as you explore that idea. But tell us the process that you used to identify. I mean, once the kernel of the idea really was ready to bloom, so to speak, what did you use to identify and then to select the women that you included in Big Dreamers?
That's a great question too. It was a really difficult process because, of course, you know, I did want to include all of these different professions and different countries and ethnicities. At the same time, I never wanted it to feel like this comprehensive tome, or like it's impossible, first of all,
Sure.
but also I just didn't think that was really the point of it. And it was really more to just, for me, give this sense of how far back and how present feminism is among Latinas. And that was really why I wanted to start with Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. And I really wanted to show what I consider such an important aspect of the Latina feminism that I've come to know, which is just that it wasn't about just getting ahead personally, but really like making it possible for this whole community. And starting with Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who, you know, in her letter, she cited all of the different women in history, like Hypatia and all of these different women who contributed. And her conclusion was never just that she was this brilliant diamond in the rough, you know, among the rubble kind of, but that, you know, all women had this capacity to shine. And that was something that, starting with her, and then just as a guiding principle when I was trying to find the other women, that they also really uplifted other women. I know Susana Torre, the architect, that's been such a big part of her identity and her work, is making spaces really inclusive for women, and you know, not just women, just inclusive spaces in general, but it was a guiding principle for her and so many of the other Latinas, Gumercinda Paez from Panama, who fought for women's rights and Latinx and Afro Latinx rights as well. And you know, all of these women they really, really wanted to support their communities and other women in the process. And that was something that was incredibly important to me in selecting the women.
Were there any countries where you had greater difficulty finding Latina role models?
Um, I wouldn't say that at all, actually. There were so many more from so many more countries. And even, for example, just having La Doctora Rigoberta Menchutum from Guatemala, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so many other people that I want to include. But I did want the book to feel manageable. It is supposed to be for children, and I wanted it to feel like something intimate where they could see someone who either shared a story or a history or an experience like theirs. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be this overwhelming tome. So yeah, I think that it wasn't so much about who was in each country. At the same time, that being said, I think there were some difficult decisions about, for example, there was an artist that I wanted to include, I won't name her name, but I found out that, you know, she owned slaves, her family owned slaves. And I thought to myself, you know, I do like her work, but there's also a lot of people who I could include that don't have that history. So I think there were definitely decisions like that. And that's not to say that people who aren't in the book are because they had, you know, something about their history like that. But I think there were some difficult decisions like, well, this person, you know, maybe is credited with changing the course of art history or something like that. But at the same time, there are other people whom I could find. So I did do the work to research people that I felt also aligned with my values. And that was a part of it for sure.
Well, that's really, really important that the values that values guided your work, guided your selection, guided the people that the stories that you told. I think that is very telling, and is not in the book, I think, in specific words, but it's something that I appreciate very much knowing at this time. So were there other things that you wanted to do with the book that were not possible given, say, budgetary or publication constraints?
You know, I would say that my editor, Laura Godwin, and also Adriana Dominguez, who, you know, was enormously part of this book. She called it like her adopted child. You know, I think that they were just incredibly encouraging. We had a lot of conversations that really delved into like, you know, Latinx identity and all of these things. And I think that those conversations were really important, but I never felt that they were restrictive in any way. They were more just to really look at why each thing was chosen the way it was. And there was so much thought in every single detail. And I know if you know Adriana Dominguez, you can imagine that because she's just one of the most thoughtful people that I know in particular. But yeah, I mean, my editor as well, we really talked about so many different aspects of the book, but it always felt more like to open up conversations rather than say, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that. It felt like a wonderful collaboration.
Well, it's really interesting because I think in today's world, there is so much less involvement of the editor with the writer that normally in my not so recent experience, I guess, there really was, they wanted the manuscript ready to publish, really very close to ready for publication. And so it sounds to me like you had more of the old experience where an editor really helped to shape the book through the questions.
Yeah, I would say in some ways, yes. I can't compare since this is my first book, but yes, it was. I mean, the book wasn't ready when I presented it, when it got sold. So I think that was part of it as well. There was a sampling of the profiles and the illustrations, but it wasn't finished. So I think there were a lot of conversations. I mean, the list of who was included changed like so many times, even throughout the process. So yeah, it was always.
That's very interesting. So tell me, what was the hardest part of the process for you? Were materials about these women hard to find? Were materials in Spanish and or English? How was that whole process for you?
Well, you definitely nailed it. It was the materials, since I mentioned that, you know, a lot of these stories were not widely circulated. There weren't a lot of materials, and it was a question of, for example, contacting the museum in Brazil and asking about Maria Auxiliadora's book. I knew there was a book on her and I could find out some information about her, but I really wanted this book, and trying to find this book that wasn't widely circulated. And that was, in some ways an easier thing because there was a whole book written about her. And then for other people, for example, Gumercinda Paez from Panama, who I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to know her story. I found out that she was a playwright who wrote radionovelas and then became a congresswoman who based her career essentially on those very stories and the people from her community that she wanted to support. And I thought her story just sounded fascinating, but I really didn't know a lot about her childhood or her life story that went along with it. So I was scavenging the internet looking for any books about her, and I found one book that a current congresswoman was holding up in a picture, and I thought, I'm going to try and contact this congresswoman. I mean, I had really no particular hopes that she would write back to me. I contacted so many people throughout this project, but she did, and she even sent me through WhatsApp pages from the book that were printed to Gumercinda Paez. And I also found another woman who had been researching her for her thesis, and her whole thesis was dedicated to her. So I spoke with her, and Dania Batista is her name, and the congresswoman was Balbina Herrera. And they were just such lovely women and just so embracing of the project and offering support in any way that they could. So it was a really difficult part, finding the information, contacting libraries and contacting bookstores and museums and things like that to see what I could find, and academics who I knew were researching. But at the same time, it was really what made this book feel like this community project, because so many people contributed their little tidbits of whatever they had. They were happy to contribute it, and it just meant so much to me.
Great. So where were you when you were working on this book? Were you in Guatemala or in?
I was in Guatemala, yes. I mean, I started the posters while I was still in New York, but I came to Guatemala, and really most of the book was done here in Guatemala, in a coffee shop mainly.
Okay. So were you teaching at the time?
I was not actually. I was working, believe it or not. I do some teaching, but I was mainly working dubbing French television shows into English. It was a very kind of random thing to be doing at the time, but it also helped me, I think, to have a sense of the pacing and the story. And
did you have an opportunity to ask any children for feedback about your stories?
I did. Actually, one child that I met at the library here through my partner, she was the one who insisted that if I was going to write a book about women, that I needed to include a forensic anthropologist, which, is not the kind of request you normally get from a 10-year-old girl. But, it made so much sense to me, because in Latin America, of course, forensic anthropologists have been so key to really kind of delving into the human rights abuse that we have experienced throughout the continent, and uncovering it, and also finally giving families kind of the closure that they were looking for, being able to identify these stories and finally explain what happened, as as cruel as they are. At the same time, so many families just didn't know, and that's why we have this whole term, the desaparecidos. And so when she told me that, I happened to be writing Mercedes Sosa's profile, and she was talking, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. She was talking about how important it was as well in this kind of reconstruction of Argentina. And I just thought how beautiful that this little girl thought that this should be included. And when I found Mercedes Loretti's story, it was it was so powerful. And so I did have feedback. I also have a niece who happens to be the exact age of, of the audience for this book. I just met with her in her school a couple of days ago. So I think that, you know, there was feedback, and also from other children that I work with through the library and things like that. But I wasn't teaching specifically at the time the way I was when I started the posters.
Okay. So after your research and writing of the book, what qualities do you find that cross-cut these amazing women? What would you consider these traits? Would you call them leadership traits?
I would say that many of them do share leadership traits for sure. They all have very different experiences and backgrounds, and depending, you know, I really wanted to show that not everyone has this idea set out for them when they're little children that they're going to change the world or they're going to do these huge things and have these accomplishments. And that's why I show them as children in the book, just these initial sparks and what led them on their path. And I think that what would unite them in certain ways, they were all incredibly curious. They loved learning, and they also, as I mentioned before, I think shared this idea of bringing people up with them and really being part of their community and carrying that pride in their community as well as they figured out what they wanted to do. And I know that for a lot of them as well, they really didn't listen to what most people said. I think that was a common trait throughout, you know, just going forward, despite what, you know, the tias and the abuelitas and whoever it was, you know, their fathers, whoever it was, telling them this isn't for you or this isn't something you can do. And they really just went forward regardless.
Well, they're all beautiful stories. And there are two questions from our Denver book club that make a lot of sense to ask you. And one of them is, do you plan a sequel? And the other one is, how do we get the book into the classrooms? What are your suggestions?
Oh, those are both great questions. Well, I have many more stories, as I mentioned, that I would love to tell. So if that were a possibility, that would be wonderful. It hasn't been formalized yet, but it is a conversation that I've talked about with my editor for sure. And the way to get this book into the classroom, there was this amazing teacher's guide that was made through Macmillan. These two incredible teachers. Oh my goodness, their names are slipping my mind at the moment. I'm sorry, but it's on the Macmillan website as well as my own website, and they created a teaching guide in both English and Spanish. The book is now available in English and Spanish as well, and I think that, I mean, it's sold anywhere books are sold. So I think that should work out pretty well. But there are, of course, always these programs that specifically support schools, like an Open Book Foundation or Page Turners Make Great Learners, and organizations like this that can support schools.
Well, it has been a pleasure and a privilege to interview you, Juliet, and I look forward to the sequel and to telling everybody about this beautiful little book.
Thank you so
Comadre
much.
Maria, put your book up too. Yeah, it's a beautiful book, beautifully illustrated, and very, I enjoyed reading it very much. It's a fast read, Comadres. You can read it in way under an hour, but it's so much fun, and I can't wait to share it with all the young people that I get to meet these days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be here and also to hear the other wonderful interview and meet all of you.
Madre Maria?
Oh, okay. Well, thanks to you all. Thank you very much. It has been amazing. And by the way, Juliet, I'm buying your book right now because I want my granddaughters who are 6 and 10, who are, you know, very good little activists and feminists to read it right away.
I will be buying your book too. I loved your description and your wonderful writing advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies. Our many thanks to authors María Amparo Escandón and Juliet Menéndez and their publishers, Flatiron Books and Henry Holt and Company, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you as well to our interviewers, Comadres Teresa Lara and Dr. Nora Comstock. We are so grateful for spending time with us this evening. We enjoyed the sharing of perspectives and insights from your works and your lives. We treasure the opportunity to learn about you, and we feel more connected to you. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight, and thank you for those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank our volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as other readers. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library does not have a book you want to read, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, the Comadres and Friends Book Club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our April books are the New York City Subway Poems by Carlos Aguasaco, 5 Wounds by Kristen Valdez Quaid, My Little Golden Book About Frida Kahlo by Sylvia Lopez and Elisa Chaveri. Thank you all again for your continued support of our book club and Latino heritage. Please join us in celebrating our quinceañero throughout the year. Stay safe, wear your masks, and always read Latino Lit. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.